Hello and welcome to the Shakedown. Our mission is to inform people about how the criminal justice system works, the real people impacted by the justice system, and methods to improve justice through compassionate and casual conversation. Hosts of the Shakedown share over 50 years of combined personal experience dealing with Texas prisons and working to change the criminal justice system. And now, here's our show.
So I can completely understand. But I actually have a question for you guys, just because we are talking mental health. What was the access to it? It like depending on what. Obviously, I don't know how like in depth you guys go just yet on like your stories, but what was the access to mental health there? Was it just seeing like a counselor and getting on meds if you needed it, or?
They're really.
My experience.
Go ahead,
Ryan.
Dave. You've got more.
All right. So, my experience with the mental health in there is you go like when I went in through intake, you saw a shrink, right? Who really didn't care, asked you a bunch of questions. Are you okay? Your thoughts of suicide and all this, and they're like, okay, bye, right? And so then, I think it was
That hurts
2
me.
years later.
It really does.
But it's so true that they don't care. I shouldn't say that. I shouldn't say they don't care, but it appears that they don't. And then again, about 2 years later, I get, which I guess is their mental health checkup for me. Anyway, this is what it was. I called back in and was asked the same questions over again and said, okay, you can leave. And that was it. And there's like, you really don't have access to a therapist, a counselor, a shrink, or anybody while you're in prison. The only thing you're going to have to do is, you're going to have to figure it out yourself because they're not doing anything to help you.
It shouldn't be like that.
I was in there longer than these guys, and I've seen different eras of kind of how they dealt with this situation in prison. In the early '90s, whenever I got in there was a lot of people that would try to use. I mean, there still are, but it's not as prevalent as it was then, because the work regimen was so brutal. I mean, they put you in the fields and all that. They wait. I mean, I don't even want to get into the description of what goes on in the fields, but it's back-breaking, and it's more than a lot of people do. So these guys try to use, they try to fake mental illness to keep from, to get some kind of a medical reason why they can't go out to the fields, or why they can't work, or why they can, some kind of to better their situation. And so the medical staff was so. It doesn't matter. I mean, if you don't have some kind of demonstrable mental illness, and it's got to be to the point where there's just no denying it, and maybe even then, they still wouldn't help you, because they feel like everybody that goes in, they treated everybody that went in there as if you're just trying to get out of work.
I can speak to, so I went in there and I have epilepsy, and I don't have grand mal seizures. I have petit mal seizures, which means I have like small blackouts.
Right.
And so when I was trying to get when I tried to get, like, when I first got diagnosed, I got put on all sorts of different medications, like to figure out your dosage on what's going to work and what's not going to work. It took years. It took years to figure it out. Then we finally got the dosage right, finally got a schedule right, and then no more seizures. And then got locked up, and then they're like, no, you can't have your medicine. We might. First they just said, you don't have epilepsy. I was like, we don't have it in our records. You didn't say it when you first came in. I'm like, yes, I did. I did say it. And then they're like, and then they said, well, we're going to give you this. I'm like, that's not my medication. That's not the same thing. That doesn't work. Then they're like, well, you need to have a seizure in front of us. Like, if you're going to have a seizure, then you have to have it in front of us, and then you can do it. Then we'll give you your medication.
Let me just
And
conjure up like abracadabra. What?
Do you mean like a
right.
seizure on command? Like they say,
Yeah,
all right,
like let me just
go
snap my
ahead.
fingers. Let's go.
They're like, when you feel like you're going to have a seizure, then you need to come to medical and then you need to show us. I said, I don't have grand mal seizures, first of all, so you can't really see it. And they're like, so you can't, it's not like you're going to get a show. I just black out. And that's it. And
I can just imagine how. Do they not know you're in a prison? The point of being in a prison is you just can't walk around. You just can't walk to the infirmary whenever you want to. You're locked in a cell.
right.
Also, like, these are medical professionals talking to you about this, correct? Or
what they are, they're not doctors, they're not nurses, they're what are called, they're providers, is what they're called.
All right. Okay.
They're medical providers. They don't have any sort of licenses or anything like that.
No, they do. Oftentimes it's like a punishment for some kind of offense. A lot of them. I'm not joking.
Yeah.
I am not kidding.
No, that makes complete sense.
No one wants to work. No medical care individual wants to work in prison. It's horrible.
They hate it there. They're also one thing we haven't mentioned. They are all of them are trained that we all lie. They are all trained that we are liars.
But another thing, that they don't really care because, like, the doctor there, he's working a 40-hour week. He's making probably $100,000 a year for doing nothing. He just goes in there and sits around, surfs the internet, and goes home. And it's unfortunate.
I've seen some that do care. Don't give me that. You can't paint.
Right, like there's one or there's a few for sure.
No, there are. There's and that's one of the things I wanted to ask you about is how do individuals and Rainforest is always really big on this whole idea that don't just complain about something, be the change that you want to see and all that. So what does each one of us have to do to better this situation, to bring us closer to the ideal healthcare situation for mental health?
I mean,
and another question on top of that is,
yeah.
And what do you? I mean, in your mind, what do you see as the ideal? I mean, how would you envision a world where mental health is dealt with properly?
Okay, so I'm gonna do this backwards. So I'm gonna answer that question and then the other one because I have ADHD and that's the forefront. So my I guess ideal perfect world with mental health is everybody's treated as a human. Having borderline, not a lot of people know a ton about it. It's BPD for short. It is not bipolar disorder. It is completely villainized because it's in the same cluster B as narcissistic personality disorder, antisocial personality disorder, and histrionic personality disorder. And who had all three of those that were well known? Serial killers. So as ridiculous as that sounds, we get grouped in with them. Somebody saw on a true crime podcast that Jeffrey Dahmer may or may not had borderline, and they're like, oh, like you. And I'm like, I don't eat my friends. Thank you. So, it's like there are varying degrees of different mental illnesses. We are not awful people, and we get villainized a lot. Like it's very hard to find a therapist that will treat borderline because it is so all over the place. Like it's very black and white. So you can absolutely idolize somebody the next day and spit on their grave the next. Idolize them one day and spit on their grave the next, and you don't know why. It is just switched. So therapy is really, really difficult for a lot of therapists, and I get they have to protect their peace and stuff like that. So I've been bumped down to CPTSD because I don't have 7 out of 9. I've got like 5 or 6 out of 9 at this point characteristics. But that's just, we're villainized. We are not understood. We are villainized. And I feel like a lot of people that deal with very complex mental disorders or just misunderstood mental disorders are just kept at arm's length. And I feel like perfect world, mental health is a privilege. It's almost a requirement. Not that like you have to go see a therapist, but I think therapy would be good for everybody, whether you are just dealing with some work stress or, you're a new parent or something like that. Um, the ADHD also gives me very long-winded answers, so sorry. But
No, that's good. We
um,
got time to kill. So,
yeah, so I feel like we need to start treating mental illnesses like we treat people with physical illnesses. Like, you have diabetes, you need medication to stay alive. You have depression and anxiety, you need that medication to, a lot of the time, stay alive. Why do we sit there and go, do you really need it? Do you tell a diabetic, do you really need your insulin? Do you? No, we don't. We're like, you need that to function. So why are we doing that with, people seeking therapy and seeking help and trying to undo generational curses or undo their trauma or undo whatever the fuck is going on in their head? Sorry, I didn't mean to curse. Whatever's going on in their head. So I think that when we start really humanizing mental illness as a whole is when we're going to be making a change. And for the second, technically the first question of what do I think, you guys, it sounds ridiculous, but writing your representatives, writing your congresspeople, annoying the shit out of the governor, because it's not going to change unless somebody on the up and up decides that it needs to change. So the more people that are in their ear going, this is a problem, we need to find a solution, the more, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, or whatever that saying is. I really feel like the more we're talking about it and the more we're annoying our representatives that this is their job, the more we may actually start to move things in a different direction.
So when you're talking about that and writing your congressman, one of the big things that comes up in Congress a lot is they do talk about mental health,
Mm-hmm.
and it's the villain. It's the reason that there's school shootings. It's the reason that there's this or that, and what ends up being the result of that is, well, we just anyone who has a mental health program problem, we need to take away more of their rights. Like,
Yeah, that's not how that works.
yeah, and so how do you take what you're saying and then turn that, like, make it so that they're not taking away rights, we're getting everyone help?
I think a lot of mentally ill people and mental illness in general is not seen as an actual illness. It's seen as a problem that we just want to shove in the closet and pretend doesn't exist. So we pretend to do things and we talk a big game, and then we're just like, okay, that goes in the closet, and we don't, no more. We don't have to talk about it anymore. Like,
I
we only
think
have to
that's,
talk about it when it's in our faces. And we need to
being in
humanize it,
prison
that
and
it's,
I'm sorry, I'm gonna keep jumping over you, but
no, you're good.
coming into prison in the early '90s, I can remember that they made a lot of attempts to kind of turn prisons into a quasi mental health treatment thing. They would take these prisoners that were convicted of crimes
Hmm.
and then while they're in prison, all of a sudden now that you're mentally ill and they're going to try and treat you. It was a what I'm trying to say is that they were using prisons were a very convenient way to get a problem out of the public space. It's not a problem
Exactly.
anymore if you can just chunk these people in prison, just throw them outside of the view of everyone, and that was a whole lot of what was going on. It's really sad.
Hmm.
I was always taken by the catch-22 situation that they want it both ways. When you're standing in front of a judge, a DA will go on and on to a jury or to a judge about how competent you are and how in control that you were and how thought out any crime that you may have done was, you know,
Hmm.
to illustrate just how culpable each individual is to get you as much time as they possibly can. And then as soon as
Hmm.
you walk in the door, they can't wait to tell you how crazy you are and that you're dangerous because of your craziness, and so you can't be let go. They even
That makes
came up with,
sense.
and I mean, and don't get me wrong, this is for a small subset of
Mhm.
very unlikable people, sex offenders, but they came up with a thing called a uh, what it's called a civil commitment. Now, this idea started in Florida sometime in the 90s, where you had a guy that
Mhm.
was done with his prison sentence, and and everybody started panicking because they were saying he was nuts, they were saying he was crazy, and that they didn't want him released because he was dangerous, because he was crazy. Which in my
Mhm.
mind, the first thing I thought was, well, if he was so crazy, why didn't he go to an insane asylum? Why was he in a prison?
Right.
He would have never had. You wouldn't be dealing with this issue right now if you didn't send him to prison. He would have been getting treatment this entire time. So judges can't, said, of course you can't keep him in prison any longer than his sentence. He has to be let go.
Right.
So they came up with this concept of civil commitment, that they were going to have doctors go and examine you, and that if they determined that you weren't sane, well, then they would take you straight from prison and then put you into a mental institution, and they where they could keep you indefinitely. And they're doing that right now, but they're only doing it with sex offenders. But I've seen how things oftentimes start with the people that you can least you know um, uh, defend, like sex
Mhm.
offenders. And once that ball starts rolling, then it ends up
Yeah.
getting applied to everyone.
It's gonna get
But
real ridiculous, which is
yeah,
concerning. Yeah, because I was gonna ask you, were they actually treating, or were they just shoving a bunch of pills down people's throats and being like, "You're cured"?
if yes, there was a lot of the pill thing. That's
Mhm.
primarily what was going on. It was Thorazine whenever I first got there, was like the main
Oh my
thing, and
god.
and other over time, other drugs have had the popularity. They were over prescribing them to people. I mean, guys were walking around just, just dead eyed and drooling,
Mhm.
and
And I'm
That's
not
what
that was
knocking
Dave.
the only thing.
medication. I'm not
Huh?
knocking medication at all. I think medication is fantastic when used properly and also used with therapy and coping skills and life skills and stress management. So I'm not knocking medication at all. I'm just saying, like, you can't shove a pill at a problem and call it a day. That's not how that
No,
works.
definitely not.
Right. I
That's
think
what
you
Dave
really have
was
to give.
talking about at the beginning. He was talking about the Thorazine shuffle that a lot of inmates, especially at medical units, that's what
Hmm.
you would see them walking around on.
I
A lot
mean,
of
they call
inmates
pill window,
told
That's
and
me
in
that's a
about it.
psychiatric
medication I have
unit.
not heard in a minute.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
see a lot of people, and and then you have. It's just crazy because they just want to medicate them to keep them calm, give them a TV as a
Yeah.
babysitter, and you know, and put them
Well,
back on the
that's
street. They'll come back.
that's kind of how it is in, like, the, I guess, real world as well. Like, they just want to give you pills, and if the pills don't work, well, why don't the pills work? You just haven't found a pill that works.
Right. Well, let's
I
give you another
Medication
pill.
doesn't work on me. Therapy does. Medicate. I have been on. I got a list longer than, like, some kids' list to Santa on medications I've been on, and they didn't work. What worked was unpacking a lot of things in therapy and stuff like that. And like I said, I have friends that are on medication, and that medication has saved their life. But you can't just shove a pill at somebody and call it a day. It's not. That's not how that works. The math ain't mathin'.
And
No,
and
I
that's you talk about that. The guy that started Valium or whatever. It's like these big pharma companies. They just push,
Yeah.
push, 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 push
Well,
pills.
because it's a profit for
It's
them.
like exactly, totally. It's like
They
the
don't want
hell
to
with
see people go to
homeopathic
therapy because
treatment.
that means the medication won't work.
No, and if they do see therapy, they want to see you on Adderall or this or that or Xanax or something else. They want to see you
Hmm.
on some kind of drug because it lines their pocket.
Yeah. Or you get, like, where I live in Western New York, we have such a like, awful opioid crisis that you can't get meds that people actually would need for mental health. Like, trying to get Adderall around here is insane.
Oh, Houston's the same way. There's no pharmacies in town that have it.
No, and, like, I got off of it because I had there was such a shortage, and it worked, like, the first round that I was on it. It was great. And now I found different supplements that work a little bit better along with just ADHD management. But I mean, that's the thing. Like, I've got friends in other states that are like, yeah, I got a Xanax prescription, like no problem. And I was like, you can get Xanax? Like, they're not prescribing it here.
Yeah, it's Houston. That's a big thing. Is Xanax. Everybody, and so you can't get Xanax either, and so they got all this fake Xanax coming. That runs through that
Because
people
that's
are.
smart.
Well, so Carrie Blakinger, she has a podcast, right? She was talking about she went to tested a bunch of Adderall in Mexico, and most of the Adderall she tested for methamphetamines and not amphetamines. And a
Yeah,
lot of that
let me
Adderall
tell
is
you.
coming over here and getting sold, by
Yep, I could
pharmacies,
tell every single time. I could tell which batch of Adderall actually worked because I would get a new manufacturer like almost every time. Every other month, I had a new,
right?
like, it was either the amphetamine salts or like the D something or whatever.
Yeah,
And one would actually work, and the other one, I was like, why am I taking this? Because it's not doing
right.
shit. So I'm not surprised that things are being manufactured not correctly.
Yeah, that doesn't surprise me either because they're gonna they're just going, and big pharma just wants their money. They don't care.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And that's a part of the problem too, is they don't care.
No, they won't, as long as they're making a profit. Who cares about whether it's actually working or if it's actually good for somebody's system?
Exactly. It's all shareholder money.
Right. And
Mm-hmm.
and inside we didn't talk about, so one, well, like they really did not want inmates to have medications because that costed them money. And then two, if you
True.
actually were able to get your like hands on, like if you could prove that you had this condition and like could get all of the steps to go through it, they did have a psychiatrist at most of the ID units. I don't
Mm-hmm.
think they were at the transfer facilities, but like at the long term housing units that
Right.
you had, like if you were in prison for 5 years, you weren't going to an ID unit, so you would never, there wouldn't even be possible to like see one unless you got shipped to an ID unit.
Right.
And then for those for a long haul, you go to an ID unit, and then you go see a psychiatrist. The psychiatrist, which I also think is only at certain units, had psychiatrists. Not all of them did.
Mm-hmm.
They would just basically regiment your dose of what medication you were on, which was going to be some generic of something. And of the limited medications, it's not like you'd have a full pharmacy
Right.
there to choose from, and that
Right.
that would be it. And that's what guys have at prison. And like if you wanted to have a visit, like you say, hey, I need to go visit the psychiatrist, or you need to go get on some sort of medication or like do something at medical, you'd have to send an I-60 in one day. It
Mm-hmm.
might get responded to that night or the next day. Then you'd get called in, and it's going to take, usually minimum, it's probably going to take 2 hours. Like usually you have to
Oh
sit
yeah.
and wait to get called in.
And don't get
And
caught
that's
and count. That's another hour.
right. You're going to get caught and count at least once. Usually get caught and count twice, especially if you're going to go see like a psychiatrist, because the psychiatrist takes their sweet time. They're just trying to get through the day with as little work as possible.
Mm-hmm.
And they're just going to, and then you're going to get caught and count at least twice. But that's assuming that the officer at your dorm says, like, what is it? They listen to your lay-in. Like a lot of times they won't even abide by it because you have a lay-in. That's what's supposed to let you go to medical. Sometimes officers like, no, they'll call it out.
Yeah, that's fact.
And so then you don't, even though you have a pass to go to medical, they won't let you go.
And sometimes you get to medical, and medical will be like, "Hey, where have you been?" And you're like, "Well, if I could have got out of my cell, or if I could have got off the
Yeah.
trustee camp, I would have been here." But they wouldn't let me out, and and it's just because they don't care. Again, it's like the dorm boss
Right.
doesn't care. They're just like, it's just sad, the whole thing.
No, because
So glad to be away from there.
they don't see 90% of you as human beings. That's really what a
Well,
lot of that
that is
probably
the
boils
problem.
down to.
They're trained not to see us as human beings. I
Mm-hmm.
mean,
I think
Huh? What do you think, Dave? Come on.
No, I was going to say, I think that, that for the most part, that people that are incarcerated get more therapy from the volunteers that come in through like the religious organizations, because those people actually care,
Mm-hmm.
That was going to be
and
another.
it's not a lot. They don't get much, but it's like, at least they get something, they're getting,
Right.
That was going to be another thing I was going to ask Heather. Yeah, Heather said that one of the things that she wanted, people to do is to write their representatives, and that's all. That's very smart. That's a good idea. But I'm wondering if there's another. That's a top down kind of solution. I wonder if there's a bottom up solution, like something that we all can do, or something that we could get together and do that could be a start to a change. Or help one person.
You can find Shakedown merch, graphic novels, and other projects at waywordpress.com. That's WAYWORD press.com. If you would like to support The Shakedown, get exclusive content, and watch episodes live, you can support us at patreon.com/The Shakedown. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment to give Malone that inner peace he so richly deserves.